So I've been blogging and I've been like on Twitter now because everybody on crypto is on Twitter. So, and obviously I didn't get much respect on LinkedIn.
All your CSR friends.
Yeah. They were not liking anything.
Deepa lost the plot.
Yeah. They weren't liking anything. I wasn't getting any engagement. I mean, I'm sharing
So
my
funny.
articles. I'm so passionate about it. I'm talking to them, but they all think I'm in a very scammy industry. So then I obviously turned my attention to Twitter and I got deep.
Welcome to The Regeneration Will Be Funded. My name is Matthew Monahan, and in this series, we're exploring the intersections of regenerative finance, technology, and our living planet. Created with Ma Earth, you can find all of our conversations and more at maearth.com. Thanks for joining us. Welcome. Today's conversation is with Deepa Chowdhury of Impact DAO Media. Deepa has a knack for being early and sensing trends, whether it was in the nonprofit and social enterprise sector with her work with Salesforce Foundation, or now in chronicling the rise of impact DAOs in Web3. She actively blogs and produces media in this space. And in this conversation, we really talk about and reflect on some of the wild and crazy events that have happened in crypto over the past couple of years that Deepa has been following closely, including the enormous donation of Shiba coins to COVID relief funds, making Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador, and the rise of the Ukraine DAO with the conflict with Russia. There are many firsts being recounted here, and honestly, I think that there will be movies made about a lot of these events in the future. All of this culminates in what Deepa refers to as doing good in crypto. The conversation was recorded in May 2023 at the ReFi Summit in Seattle. I hope you enjoy it. Deepa Chowdhury. Today we are here with Deepa Chowdhury. Deepa also goes by Deepa Rocks across her social media handles. She is the founder of Impact DAO Media. Thank you, Deepa, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And we're here at ReFi Summit in Seattle. How's your conference going so far?
Oh, it's been great. I've been part of this conference from day one. We actually help it build in public. So we did like a open call, got everybody who's, who wanted to contribute ideas and how we should like make it different from ETH Denver, because everybody had just come back from ETH Denver and they were like quite frustrated with the fact that it was so big and you never really got to have deep conversations with anyone. So we just did this like a week after we came back. Like everybody was like kind of, like we need to rethink events. And so I've been part of ReFi Summit from day one, and we really got the focus on impact DAOs as well, because ReFi, people generally associate ReFi with climate. And Rex was like, it should be governance is going to be big, so definitely impact DAOs is core to it. And ReFi's Summit is pretty independent. Like I know there's a whole ReFi movement, but it's indie, so it's great. Yeah, I love it. It's like, it's something that I'm part of, from day one.
Yeah, well, I loved being at ETH Denver a few months ago, but I also really love the spaciousness and the relaxed feel of this smaller, more intimate setting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like I loved the Shelling Point at ETH Denver. That was amazing,
That's
right?
how we
Like
met.
you found, and you found a tribe, right? And the next day I come back, I walk in, and I'm lost, and I leave the conference in like 20 minutes of being there because I'm so lost, and I'm like. Because after like such a great day one at Shelling Point, I'm like, where am I? Like, who am I meeting? What am I doing here? And I go and attend all these side events that are happening from morning. Like they're not after party events, but they're like side events. So I just go and attend those, and nothing to do with Impact DAOs, but I went and attended so many of Nouns DAO events, and I loved them. Like, and I learned so much about. They were all spin-offs from Nouns DAO, So it was amazing. Like there was this. DAO that got started around skateboarding.
Yeah.
Like this guy from Brazil, he just submitted a proposal, got funded by Nouns DAO, and it was his daytime event, and it was all the skaters community, and I'm part of one in Vancouver too. So I totally loved it, and I learned so much.
Nice. Oh, that's fun. Yeah, there's so many different rabbit holes and cool side events and things. It feels like Eat Denver's kind of like Burning Man, and then like Refi Summit's like one of the small regional burns or one of the decompression parties afterwards.
Yeah, yeah.
Part of the reason I'm so excited to have this conversation with you, Deepa, is you have a more traditional social enterprise background, but now you've moved into the Web3 space. So if you can share a bit about your background and then your journey.
Yeah, so I've been a social entrepreneur my entire career. Like I've done a course on social entrepreneurship from INSEAD in Singapore. I was there, and that's where I got to work with the Salesforce Foundation. I was leading their philanthropic initiative for Asia Pacific. So I was responsible for Pacific, like the New Zealand, Australia, whole of Asia. And it was pretty exciting because they were just branching out into Asia Pacific at that point of time. Like Salesforce is a SF-based company. And they actually initiated the model of 111. Integrated philanthropy, which Google and Box and every other tech company in the Valley have embraced it.
Can you explain what that is?
So what that really means is that the day Mark Benioff started Salesforce in his apartment on Telegram Hills, he committed 1% of equity to doing good. He didn't even know how much he's going to make out of Salesforce. Like it was like just getting started, like with open your laptop and today I'm going to build a company, Salesforce, but I'm going to commit 1% to equity. Like 1% of equity to doing good the day it goes public. And that was phenomenal because, when they went public, that turned out to be a lot of money for doing good. So that is 1% equity, but also what he meant by 111 model is that you give 1% of your employee time to doing good, And so as somebody leading Salesforce philanthropy, I actually had dashboards to make sure that every employee is donating 1% of their time to doing good. So it was very intentional. It was not like, it was part of their performance review. It was as important as building great software or selling the software. You have to do good. And then the third 1% is donating your product. So we donated Salesforce CRM to nonprofits, free, up to certain licenses. And for bigger nonprofits, like it was always like 10 licenses are free, but beyond that, if you want, then there are deep discounts. And so Salesforce Foundation itself was like a social enterprise, So we did get endowed by the 1% equity, but at the same time, we had our own revenue stream coming into the foundation by selling to big nonprofits, which needed more licenses than 10, like the big universities. They're all nonprofits, right? So we had like a team that did that. But as my role in Asia Pacific was to really make sure that employees are giving 1% of their time. We have grants program, like just giving grants to nonprofits to take them forward into the future. Like cloud technology at that time was big. Like right now Web3 is big, but there was cloud technology and nonprofits were still using old ways of managing their volunteers, their donors, and like Salesforce is all about customer relationship management. That's the software.
Right.
So it was just taking them into the future, like just getting them to use technology. And so I've always worked at the intersection of technology and social impact. And I think it was seeded by Salesforce. And after that, I moved to California. I lived in the Bay Area. And I got to see, it was the golden years then, all the like, LinkedIn was the first company that went IPO when I was there, and then Facebook, and then Airbnb was formed during that era. And Y Combinator, which is this accelerator, which basically seeded a lot of these big companies at that point of time, including Coinbase. They opened up for nonprofits. For the very first time, they said nonprofits can now apply to be a YC, startup, and I started tracking that scene because I was always passionate about it. I had my publication at that point of time, and I was just tracking and writing and profiling social entrepreneurs that are using technology to accelerate impact. So it was always like I always worked at this intersection.
And then what led you to crypto?
Oh yeah, that's a fun story. So I've always been on Twitter, I saw this tweet by Jack Butcher. Actually, he's a really famous creative, and he was doing an NFT mint for India's crypto outbreak. There was a very severe outbreak in, not crypto outbreak, sorry,
COVID.
COVID outbreak. Yeah. So there was a severe COVID outbreak in India in 2021, yeah. So it was the Delta outbreak. Like a lot of people were getting hospitalized. It was like, and people were dying due to lack of oxygen. So he did this NFT mint for oxygen. And so from his tweet, it led me to the person who initiated the campaign, which was the founder of Polygon. So Polygon is the L2, level 2 of Ethereum, very popular. And they're an Indian team, basically. And they were moved by the situation. And they said, hey, the founder actually said, I can't take it sitting down anymore. And I'm going to mobilize funds in crypto. And that really got me into like, how will he move the funds? Does crypto has purchasing power? Like I wanted to really track that, and because because of my Asia Pacific background, I knew that to get funds into India, you need to have like a special kind of certificate, like only nonprofits with those kind of certificates can accept foreign donations. So I wanted to really track the money trail, how does it go from say crypto to donations to like fiat to really buying oxygen cylinders, because that was the need of the hour. So I started tracking that campaign from day one, and 3 days and then I opened a Substack account basically, because I'm always, that's how I learn about anything. So I started writing about it. And 3 days later, Vitalik Buterin made a donation of $1 billion worth of Shiba coins. So Shiba coins are like this meme coin. And that's been like, I think it was the largest donation in her history made on a single day, like $1 billion worth of Shiba coins. And I was like, wow, this is like really going big, this campaign. I didn't even know like when I started like writing about it, and It's so big. And so I tracked the whole money trail, like how they converted, like slowly liquidated it, because so much of the community, like Shiba community, if like they would have immediately liquidated it, it would have like had a disastrous effect on the community. Like, so they slowly liquidated it, how they held it in the multi-sig, how they opened a bank account in some island and converted it into like stable coins because of the fluctuation. Like it was so fascinating. Like I learned so many concepts just tracking this campaign. Like what is a multi-sig? What is a stable coin? Like what is fiat? I didn't even know what, like, we don't make that distinction in our daily life, right? Like crypto and fiat. Like, so I learned so much. And so that was my entry point into crypto. And recently I was back in India and I got to speak with the team, they have now formalized themselves. So they've always called themselves the Crypto COVID Relief Fund, but now they're calling Blockchain for Impact because of just the negative, perception of crypto in India. And they now want to work with the government of India. And they, after liquidating and everything, like that $1 billion have turned into $500 million, which is great because it was magic internet money, just invented from nowhere, like a meme coin on top of it. It was not even like ETH or BTC or whatever. And that's 500 mil, which is not bad. And it's one of the largest public health fund in India. They want to make strategic investments in research, prevent the next pandemic, work with the government of India, like really strengthen the rural infrastructure. So that is all very fascinating. Crypto can make real impact.
Yeah. It's such a cool story that's not very well understood. It'll be, I think, yet another one of those stories about Ethereum that will come out years later and people kind of grok like the magnitude. And it's my understanding of it, the Shiba community sent Vitalik a whole bunch of their tokens.
Exactly.
He didn't even want them.
He didn't want it. That's why he donated all of it.
They kind of gave it to him to like trying to create legitimacy for the project by like, Vitalik is involved,
airdropped it.
Right. And so what do when you're this big figure in crypto, as Vitalik is, and you get all these meme coins sent to you that you didn't even ask for, and the graceful and elegant maneuver was to donate them and to move them into a nonprofit structure, this COVID relief fund for India that could use those funds. But to just sell all of those funds overnight would have crashed the price. And it wasn't clear that even though it was like $1 billion, like, would there even be 100 million or 10 million? Like it wasn't clear at the time.
Exactly.
No one was trying to manipulate the price of Shiba to stay higher just for this donation. But the way it worked out with the meme coin mania, the spillover effects of this kind of hype bubble, was that there was real capital that was actually able to
Exactly.
transfer.
And I think what was important was because the Polygon team was engaged, like the founder,
Yeah,
Sandeep, like if it was given to a nonprofit,
they
I
wouldn't have
don't
known
think they
what
would
to
have
do.
handled it well, right?
No,
Like
of
that's what
course.
I said that in one of my blog posts.
Mm,
They wouldn't know what to do with it, but
right,
because it was Polygon, because they were people of Web3, they knew
right.
exactly how to handle it. And Sandeep, I remember tweeting it out, just trying to comfort the community. Like, I know
Mm,
this big donation has come into us, but we will not cause any harm to the Shiba community. We're going to
mm.
slowly liquidate it. And I think he put that tweet out, and that was like, wow, like he's a deep thinker. Like, he knows what to do next,
Yeah,
like he
yeah.
knows how to handle this donation.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, hats off to him, to the whole community who did it. And yeah, it's just it's a funny story. And
Yeah.
what a funny way to get
I
into
know,
crypto.
and before that, I always thought it's a scam. Like that's how
Totally.
the mainstream always portrays it. And I've been
Mm,
like a social entrepreneur, and that really got me into crypto. And I started talking about it to all my peers who were,
mm.
who were with me at Salesforce, but now they're leading CSR for different tech companies. Like you
Right,
name
right,
them,
right.
and they're there. They're the
CSR
heads.
being corporate social
Corporate
responsibility.
social
Yeah.
responsibility for the tech companies, and I'm talking to them about crypto, and they're like, "What are you doing in crypto? Isn't it a scam?" And
Mm,
so I had like a really difficult first year from 2021 to 2022, like just talking, being on
mm,
LinkedIn because that's where my professional network is mostly,
mm,
and I just started blogging intensively about the good side of crypto because I've always
mm,
like that campaign got me. I saw the potential, and soon after, I think it was May 2021, and just couple weeks later, El Salvador made Bitcoin the legal tender. And I was on the Twitter spaces with Balaji and Nick Carter, and the president of El Salvador came, and the law is getting passed in the parliament. He comes on the Twitter space, which is phenomenal. Like, when does the president come on the Twitter spaces to talk
right,
about
right.
his excitement? And it was just so fascinating for me, like to see how crypto can change lives because
Mm,
the 70% of El Salvador's population was was unbanked, but not
right.
anymore because now they
Mm,
have crypto wallets on their phone.
mhm,
And he talked about the president talked about this very successful experiment that took place in this surf town in El Salvador called
mm,
El Zonte, where they created a Bitcoin circular economy, and people were like transacting on over Lightning Network, and
mhm,
sent and there are these. Most of the kids in El Salvador have left the country. They're in the U.S. And so when they're sending remittances back over the Lightning Network, and the
mhm,
mom can instantly go buy food. She doesn't have to wait for the Western Union transfer to come.
mhm.
And El Salvador is like really behind in any kind of financial revolution, like they move hard money. Basically, they have to carry hard cash for everything, and the day you go to Western Union, sometimes you become a target because you're expecting money, and there's crime in those areas. So it was all very fascinating to listen, and for me as a social entrepreneur, that was my like, oh my gosh, like this financial inclusion part of it is so amazing because
Yeah.
as people of the sector, we've been trying to bank the unbanked for decades and we haven't made much advancement, right? Like we
Mhm,
haven't. It's so difficult. And crypto can totally change it overnight.
mm.
You don't need banks anymore. It's called
Yeah.
leapfrogging into the future, literally.
Yeah, yeah, it's such a profoundly simple and obvious place where crypto is going to change things. We had a great interview with Yosef Ayeli about Web3 in Africa and remittances and payments being just such an obvious use case where
Exactly.
you have a huge portion of the population unbanked. They get completely ripped off by the percentage that, Western Union or whomever financial intermediary takes out of each transaction. And, you have a lot of unnatural reliances on the fiat US dollar system. And so it just creates all of these challenges, and where crypto creates a whole new paradigm, right? Where there could be a global permissionless 24/7 settlement layer that people can transact and to pay very small transaction fees in and out of different assets, and to have more sovereignty of the choice of the currencies and the plurality of different tokens that they decide to
Exactly.
use. And so, this all afforded with internet access or a mobile phone device is going to transform a lot of lives. And I know that, people following the El Salvador story, yes, there's a lot of criticisms that can be lobbied and levied against the Bukele's approach in rolling this out, in the choice of using Bitcoin versus maybe some of the other chains, and whether or not the adoption is really there yet or not. And Bitcoin Beach was a case study and an example of this kind of circular economy. And I think we're just still in the early days.
Yeah, we're very early now.
Transaction fees are still higher on the blockchains than they're going to be.
Now the ordinals have come on the Bitcoin, so that's led to the congestion of the network. But it happened with Ethereum too. Like we just had quadratic funding round. I literally paid like $100 doing on-chain editing and submitting my applications. And then when I went back to make grant donations, I was like getting $60, $40. Like I wasted so much time just tracking the gas tracker, you know. So it's the problem with Ethereum too. And I feel like at the same time, people need to be protected from scam coins, like there are so many scammy ones. So it's okay if the government decides that these 2 or 3 or 4 are the ones that we're going to accept, including stable coins, because you don't want your population to be scammed at the same time. And I seriously feel he took his country to the future by just opening it up. Like before, the choice was US dollars. They never had their own stable currency to begin with. So they had US dollars. And now the citizens have an option of BTC. And tomorrow it could be something else too. But the fact that they have wallets on their phone, that they are their own bank, I think is the most profound thing.
Yeah, it's really stretching the imagination, the Overton window of what's possible and what might happen, especially in countries that are more desperate for financial sovereignty in the current system. Yeah. So you've been blogging about these different topics of blockchain for good and for positive impact, and presumably that leads you to this notion of impact DAOs.
Exactly. And I have a fascinating story behind that
Please.
too. So I've been blogging and I've been like on Twitter now because everybody on crypto is on Twitter. So, and obviously I didn't get much respect on LinkedIn.
All your CSR friends.
Yeah. They were not liking anything.
Deepa lost the plot.
They weren't liking anything. I wasn't getting any engagement. I mean, I'm sharing my articles. I'm so passionate about it. I'm talking to them, but they all think I'm in a very scammy industry. So then I obviously turned my attention to Twitter and I go deep. And then I started tracking everything on Twitter. And I love because everything gets documented on Twitter. You start a campaign and you can like totally see because everybody's doing it in public, in crypto. Right. So then Ukraine DAO happens. So Ukraine DAO happens on Feb 24th. And they launch, they say we're launching this Ukraine DAO, and Pleaser DAO is associated with it. And a lot of high profile people are associated with Ukraine DAO. And they, within 5 days, they raised $7 million. They galvanized the entire community. They accepted donations in multiple tokens. The whole rails for accepting donations in multiple tokens was set up. A website was set up, in no time, and everything was unfolding on Twitter. And I was like, my gosh, this is amazing. This kind of stuff, I've not seen it anywhere, happened so fast. And they made use of every single Web3 tool, including they minted the Ukraine's flag as an NFT. They made use of Partybid, which is a platform where you can pull in money to bid on an NFT. If I want to just donate $10, I should not be excluded. It's an important thing that we are fundraising for because, it's the Ukrainians were suddenly displaced from their country. So many had to leave. The situation was so bad at that point of time. The men had to suddenly pick up arms and they weren't given an option to leave. And Russia did a full-blown invasion on Ukraine. It was really sad. And the girl who founded it, Alona, she's a Ukrainian living in London. Her parents were still living back in Ukraine. And so she had that ground knowledge, which are the charities most active, who's doing what. She had that really deep knowledge, and she had friends in Ukraine. And so she does this whole mobilization sitting in London. And then she knew exactly who to direct funds to. And that was the most fascinating part. And I tracked this campaign literally from tweet to tweet. Okay, now we've set up our wallets. Okay, now we've got this done. Now we've got this done. And I tracked the entire campaign on my Substack. And I did a piece saying Ukraine DAO is this is the future of nonprofits, basically. Ukraine DAO's model, to be able to come together on the internet, mobilize funds, move at the scale and speed that crypto allows. I think this is the future of doing good. And that was the title of my article. I don't remember the exact title, but it was like this. And that got me deep into the DAO, Impact DAO rabbit hole. That was my starting point, Feb 24th. 2022.
So I mean, it's kind of humanitarian crisis response where the world comes together behind rapid deployment of funds for a campaign. And now that we have these new digital primitives, NFTs, DAOs, different forms of multi-sigs, organizing, transparency on the chain, et cetera, it just creates a new possibility set where maybe the old school model would have been a telethon and some country music singers saying, call these numbers to donate your money.
And can I tell you something, like the disaster, I've managed disaster aid funds, like when the Indian tsunami took place that hit Indonesia, in Thailand, and all of these places. Like I was in Singapore and I briefly worked for a nonprofit that was deploying this disaster management funds. And I know the kind of, the intermediaries, the number of intermediaries that are there, because during disasters, people are very charged and emotionally charged to give money. So they don't think twice, they just give money. And a lot of nonprofits become rich during disaster times. Even if disaster is not their focus, they will suddenly make disaster their focus. Like for instance, there's a international organization, but they have like a small nonprofit. It's international, so they have networks of nonprofits all across the world. And if a disaster takes place and they don't even have any expertise in it, they suddenly make it their thing. We're on the ground, we're doing this, and they'll raise funds, and they'll take a significant cut every time you move through layers. Like if you move from America to regional to the ground, by the time it gets to the people, like that $100 sometimes becomes $50. So it's not very efficient. Right. And two things that really struck out for me. One, that Ukraine DAO was fundraising. Also, there was another nonprofit from Ukraine that was fundraising, which was called Come Back Alive on Patreon. And they got shut down by Patreon during that period of time because they said they're raising funds for the army. But, like everybody had to pick up arms. They weren't given an option, right? Mm-hmm. And I know Ukraine DAO, they continue to raise funds. They weren't interrupted because they were on the blockchain. They were unstoppable. Mm-hmm. And they did donate money to Come Back Alive. But Come Back Alive put it for buying gears and safety gears. It wasn't for buying the weapons. And so did the government of Ukraine. It's the first government actually that solicited funds in crypto. Like they had like a whole crypto machinery, like the nonprofits, the NGOs were ready to accept crypto donations. They had crypto wallets already in place. They knew this is going to happen. Yeah. And so they solicited funds in crypto for the very first time. I think they raised over $100 million and stuff. Yeah. And the government also came and said that we've not used this donation money to buy any weapons. Like I attended one of the Twitter spaces where the Minister of Digital Transformation came on, not him, but there was a Ukraine-based crypto exchange that was helping the government off-ramp crypto. Yeah. And so he came on to the spaces and he talked about the fact that it's not gone to buy weapons, it's gone to buy safety gears, helmets, things that they need. People need.
I mean, it seems like we're pointing to three different technical characteristics in this example. One is there's just radical efficiency, where a traditional aid organization might end up taking half of the funds. In the case of crypto, maybe it was only 10 or 15% for the overhead or whatever. I'm making that number up, but it was radically more efficient, right? And then the second characteristic, obviously, being the transparency. So because you can track on the ledger where the funds are going, you could just get much greater understanding of like, okay, where did my donation go? And I think that's a common impulse for donors, whether they're donating $10 or $10 million, is like, I want to understand with accountability and transparency what impact did my money
make.
And then the third characteristic being the censorship resistance, where, this was really an instance where in the traditional payment space, boom, shut down, geopolitical entanglements and, corporations and governments working to decide where funds can and cannot flow. Where in crypto, I'm not saying it's always going to be better for this reason, but it is clearly much more censorship resistant. And so those three things, like they can be all somewhat agnostic. Like it doesn't automatically mean that the result is going to be good, right? Like these tools can be used for malicious, purposes as well. And obviously we saw in the early days of crypto, one of the main criticisms and I think factual was that a lot of, laundering of money or purchasing of drugs in black markets online was happening, to skirt around KYC, AML, and other sorts of financial regulations. People were using it for other, gray market activities. But I do think what's interesting to me is that the nature of that Ukraine DAO then getting to the point where you were emphasizing like it was used for defense and shields, and the ministers of government having to say, we did not use this money. It's like you don't see somehow in the traditional payment system, US has imported enormous amounts of weaponry and military aid to Ukraine. There's no pressure to say we didn't use this money for guns and fighter jets, right? But somehow, because of the nature of this being kind of this,
because it was publicly funded, right? Because you're raising money from people, and
but that's what the public funded is as well.
I know, but when you treat governments and when you treat US is such a big defense industry, they need to keep the defense industry. Like they've messed up with so many democracies because they want to keep the defense industry at all-time high all the time. Like I don't know if you've read this book, The Confessions of an Economist Hitman.
I know what book you're talking about. No,
I read that book because I did a proposal for World Bank once. Again, when I was in Singapore, I hustled a lot. I did a lot of little projects before I worked with Salesforce Foundation. But that was one proposal I did for a World Bank consultant who was writing a proposal to submit to the government of Indonesia on disaster management. How to prepare Indonesia for disaster management, because Indonesia is made up of so many islands and they're prone to disasters. And the money all goes back to America. So these poor countries take loan from America, which is basically World Bank and IMF, and all this. And then the people who come to consult them are all people from the Western world. So the system is designed to keep these countries poor. It's very macro. I won't get into it.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, and I guess like I am not. I don't naively believe that like crypto won't be used for weapons. Like I think that, money is a tool and a reflection of the consciousness and the activity of what we're doing on this planet. And, the humans currently engage in wars. And so if we introduce new money into that context, then, it's going to be used that way. But can these new tools shift by the nature of their architecture, some of the behaviors, some of the incentive mechanisms and so forth. And I do think you're pointing to really good examples.
I think internet can be used for both good and bad. We've seen that. And so does Web3 can be used for both good and bad. And somebody of person of high consciousness and who's always been a social entrepreneur, like always want to use technology to do good. I've always been so narrowly focused on crypto's good use cases, and I feel like if we can bring more people into Web3 to use it for good, because it has so many great characteristics, right? Like banking the unbanked, transparency, like people have total distrust with nonprofits because they don't know where their money is going. I know 2 nonprofits, they came up with some really great ways to build that trust with the public. One is Charity Water. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's a New York City based, started by Scott Harrison. Charity Water, he said, we're going to set up 2 bank accounts. One bank account is where, people like you and me who donate, 100% of the money is going to build wells in emerging markets. And the other bank account, we will never use, we will use it for our operating expenses, so the public has view of 2 bank accounts. And so one is 100% towards projects. One bank account will fund it from corporate donation, like Jack Dorsey of Twitter is like a big supporter of Charity Water. And so we'll endow it from those donations and that'll cover our operating expenses. And the other example is WotC. I'm not sure if you've heard of WotC, but that was the first nonprofit that got accepted in Y Combinator. And his idea was radical transparency around how money comes into nonprofits and how it flows out. So what he did essentially was he just opened up his Google spreadsheet to the world. This is every single donation coming in, and this is how every single donation going out. But we don't need to use Google's spreadsheet anymore. We've got the blockchain, and it will never be edited. It is there. Like you can go back to a spreadsheet and edit it, but blockchain is uneditable. So I think nonprofits should totally make use of blockchain to bring that kind of trust back, You know, like the flow of money. I think people will be more comfortable giving money to them. Like as a person from this industry, like I don't feel like giving to nonprofits. I'm telling you, I don't know where my money is going to go. You know, I would rather give to WotC because I trust them because they established the trust.
Yeah. And I think as we learn these behaviors and see, because trust and transparency is also an existential theme for corporations, not just nonprofits. You know, there's a lot of skepticism or lack of trust
I can
in a
get
lot
to
of
that too,
companies.
you know. Oh my gosh. Okay.
And then also governments.
Yes, supply.
Right?
Oh, by the way, companies, supply chain. Oh my, the blockchain can be used to track the entire supply chain, you know, and bring transparency around your products. Like sometimes I don't know if I should trust the labels. Fair trade, okay, but do I trust it? Like what your copy on your packaging, like you said it's ethically made. Like, do I trust it? Like I don't know.
Right.
But what if you can support your claims with that kind of transparency, radical transparency, where you track the supply chain, you know, you show it on the blockchain.
Yeah.
I think there's so much potential, not just for the nonprofits, but social enterprises too. And social enterprises, a lot of them are in ethical goods.
Yeah.
You know, like direct fair trade coffee and more ethical production, like organic cotton and things like that, you know. And they make these claims, and if they can prove those claims by having a proof of you know, something.
Yeah. Well, we had a great interview with Alan Ransel from Protocol Labs, and he was just blowing my mind last night, telling me about some of the efforts Protocol Labs and Filecoin around zero knowledge attestations applied to decarbonization of supply chains. And I won't get into all of the technical geek speak, but it's just to say I completely agree that these tools are going to change the paradigm in which we can attest and verify and make claims in distributed supply chains. And whilst we are also going through this globalization, deglobalization, decarbonization, you know, reinvention of those supply chains, I think that these ledger technologies and these applications for cryptography are going to make a really big difference.
Exactly.
So how does this then lead to, you know, so maybe help us frame what is an impact DAO? You've been chronicling these different examples. You know, we talked about COVID Relief Fund in India. We talked about
that
Ukraine
was the first
DAO.
They never called themselves a DAO because they had all the characteristics of a DAO. They had a multi-sig, they had a Discord, they had people, global coordination, people actually coordinating from, like somebody else managing Twitter from the US, somebody else doing something for them, and then they had an operational team in India. You know, so it was a DAO, but they never called themselves a DAO. So DAOs are relatively very new, and impact DAOs are even newer. You know, and I think the real impact DAO space took off in 2023. So 2022 was still pretty young. Ukraine DAO was the second, I would say. And yeah, Gitcoin also transitioned into a DAO. Gitcoin is a tech company that started in 2017. They transitioned into a DAO in 2021, May. There were some other DAOs, like DAOs focused on doing good were formed in 2021, but there weren't that many. So it's a very young scene. And I saw in Ukraine DAO the model of doing good, you know, like this is the future model of doing good. And I want you to understand more. And it's like, imagine like, I just want you to understand more. And I'm like, let's do a research, you know, let's see who are the other DAOs that are focused on doing good. And let's research them. Let's see how they function, because it's a totally new way of operating, right? Like they're operating on the internet. They don't have offices. Sometimes they don't even have a legal entity. Like Ukraine DAO doesn't have. I know another DAO that doesn't have a legal entity. They don't believe in it anymore. They're mission first. They don't want to waste time doing infrastructure. You know, they don't have no physical space. Everything gets organized on the internet. Work gets done on the internet. Very important, right? Like, and they're super efficient. So let's study them. And so and that was because of my own curiosity and passion to understand that. And I wanted to also do it the DAO way, because I always learn by doing, and I wanted to live a DAO life myself. So I launched Impact DAO Media, and I did a call for contributors. Like I wrote a blog post on my Substack saying I want to launch this study because this is an exciting, this is the future of doing good. This is it. New nonprofits are going to be formed on the internet because it's so much more easier. Right? And you can tap into resources, expertise from all around the world. So I didn't even question the fact that the new nonprofits won't be. They are going to be impact DAOs. They're going to be like any social impact organization, be it the nonprofit way, like which is based on donations, or be it social enterprises which have both profit and purpose built into it. They will all launch on the internet, and that's the umbrella of impact DAOs. Like their core mission is to do good to the people and planet, and we've been doing it in a very traditional, old-fashioned way. But this is the new internet way of doing it. So I wanted to launch a study, and I did a call for contributors. And yesterday, actually, I just remember this morning, we completed 1 year as Impact DAO Media. So we launched on May 24th with a Zoom call. 20 people applied. So there was an application process because I wanted to, be comfortable working with strangers on the internet. So I just asked them to submit their Twitter handle or their LinkedIn so I can quickly do a check, like they're all legit people that I'm working with, it's scary sometimes, right? And so they were all pretty legit, and I invited them on a Zoom call, and 10 of them showed up, and they're the OGs of Impact DAO Media. And after that, I had my Discord set up. So we had an after party in a Discord. So after the Zoom call, everybody was so hyped up, like, this is going to be so great. And we had we hung out in Discord, and we just basically talked about, people started exploring the definition of impact and what are DAOs and da-da-da. And yeah, we completed a year. We researched as a DAO. We researched 12 impact DAOs with an operating experience of at least 5 months. So it was very difficult to find on June. We took like a month to identify which 12 we want to be included in the study. And we drew a criteria, like it has to be like minimum 5 months, at least minimum 5 months, so we can learn from them, how they structure, how they get work done. We didn't focus so much on the impact that they're making because we realized the scene is pretty new. It's okay if they're not making an impact right now, but we'll ask them how will they measure their impact kind of stuff. And we identified 12. We took a month, like really poured in like a lot of research finding those 12. And then we did an intensive study, which was mostly like this, having Q&As, interview style. We interviewed the founders, the contributors. We wanted to understand the contributors' economy too, because, the way work gets done is very different as unlike traditional organizations where you actually hire employees. There's a formal process to get into an organization, while DAOs work very differently. Like you can show up and get started tomorrow or get started in the next 1 hour. It's so different. So we wanted to really understand the contributors, their mindset, what makes, how these contributors differ from traditional people, because what we realized, they're more entrepreneurial, they're more like, let's do it first, let's show, then let's get in. It's like very different, like the scene is very different. So we interviewed them, at least 3 or 4 people per 12 nonprofits. So really good 40 people we interviewed. We streamed most of those as podcasts. So they're very authentic, raw interviews. Great ones, I would say, like Proof of Humanity interviews I love because they made really big mistakes while running the DAO thing. Klima DAO again, there's some great ones. Gitcoin, amazing interviews. So if you go and you want to understand how these people DAO, anybody from the nonprofit sector or social impact organizations want to learn, they should just listen to the podcast and understand the psychology of those people, why they're doing what they're doing. Very important to understand that, and what kind of choices they're making in terms of running these organizations and their vision and what excites them and why they chose to be a DAO.
And so people can find that by typing in Impact DAO
DAOs.xyz.
DAOs.xyz.
So Impact DAOs.xyz. So we did the research, we streamed these interviews as podcasts, and we wrote a book as a DAO. So we're the first DAO to write a book. And it was tough. If I had to do it solo, I could have done it in 3 months, but we took 6 months. That's fine because you got to coordinate. We had 22 people from 12 different countries write this book over the period of 6 months. And we did it as a DAO, distributed teams across different time zones on Discord. And the most fabulous experience, seriously, being a DAO and writing about DAOs, we could ask the right questions, because we were facing the same challenges. Impact DAOs .xyz is where all our knowledge is about DAOs, So there's a book that you can read, there's a podcast that you can listen to, and we just launched a course, so nice. Which is a super fast-paced course for the internet people with short attention span like me to quickly onboard and get started with building, like onboard into the future of work and organizing, because the kind of tools they use, the way work gets done is radically different from any organization, even if it's like a tech company who says we're remote first or whatever, but they still function very traditionally. While DAOs are inventing a totally new way of working. Like it's so internet native, because they are on the internet, they're forced to think, how can we get things done on the internet? So it's amazing.
Totally. And yeah, shout out also to Ali Borda, my friend who, helped put a directory of Impact DAOs together with Kevin Owaki, who we did an interview with here at Refi Summit as well. But, very small group of people, holding this mantle around Impact DAOs. And you must be pinching yourself at times to be like, witnessing and grokking, like, this is the future of social enterprises and nonprofits.
Yeah.
And they're like the only voices, kind of documenting and chronicling and writing about this. And your friends on LinkedIn are still like, what is Deepa talking about?
No, actually, they love me now.
They're coming around?
Oh, yeah. So
Nice.
now I introduce myself as a DAO person, and this is the future of doing good. And they're very intrigued. They're listening to everything.
Interesting. So what's happening? Is it shifting? So
it's shifted. I'm back on LinkedIn, by the way, and I do LinkedIn events, which is like the Twitter Spaces
interesting.
equivalent on
I didn't
LinkedIn.
even know they do LinkedIn
yeah,
events.
no,
Yeah.
and it's buzzing now. And I have
wow.
people I have such great networks. I can't tell you. I know I'm connected with this person who basically leads the whole fundraising for New Zealand, and I have such great networks because I've worked in so many different countries, and also being in Singapore, it was the entire Asia Pacific. So I have great networks in Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, India, California.
Nice.
And they weren't paying attention, but now they come and they come and like my stuff, and they say, great work, Deepa, and things like that, which I didn't get that kind of response a year ago. And actually our research also got cited in World Economic Forum. So they did a paper on DAOs, a toolkit for DAOs. And we were in the middle of the research. I got introduced to the team who's writing the report, and they're like, hey, we'd love to learn about your research. And we've been open source from day one, and I didn't hold back any information. I'm not going to share till the time we write the book. No, I was sharing as we were learning. So everything that we were learning, we were sharing. And so I shared almost everything with them. And they gave me access to that paper that they were writing. I went and edited the DAO definition.
Cool.
I'm like, no, this is how DAOs work, whatever you know about DAOs.
Right.
Autonomous is not so autonomous, we've learned that they're very human-driven organizations. Yeah, they're autonomous to enable and automate few things. And I think multisig is the best kind of thing, like a joint bank account on the blockchain. You don't have to wait to get a bank account open. You can quickly get started. I think that's the most beautiful part of DAOing, Get quickly started. You don't have to wait.
Totally. Yeah. So are there other patterns that you've seen from these interviews and the research that you've done? What are some of the things that may have surprised you, or things that are maybe not so obvious for people newer to Web3 about this new way of working?
Yeah, there are a lot of perceptions around DAOs. People say they're autonomous because DAO stands for decentralized autonomous organizations. And I really want to clarify that they are not that autonomous. I know there are some DAOs that could be very autonomous, which are mostly around decentralized finance. So there are DAOs around money, that they want to, because strangers are coming together and they want it to be totally trustless and permissionless, and establish trust by just automating stuff, the first DAO, which was started by Vitalik Buterin, which was like an investment DAO, let's pool in money and then make investments, actually got hacked. So anyways, DAOs have had their own period of evolution, but I feel like impact DAOs are very different because people are aligning around meaning over money, and relationships matter because you're going to work together on the internet. It's you can't be, you can't, I know we are all strangers when we start, but by the end of it, we are not strangers anymore. We are friends. I've connected with people from 100 different countries in the past 1 year. I would have never imagined to do that just sitting in Vancouver before. If I had to just open something in Vancouver, like a social enterprise or something, I would have never been able to connect with so many people, and so many different ideas and so many different ways of looking at the same problem, So it is really fascinating. So yeah, Impact DAOs are very human driven. They're not that autonomous. They also are not, they are on chain, but they're not 100% on chain, you know? So multisig is the number one use case, which is being on the blockchain because multisigs are on the blockchain. Voting is the second use case because, you know, you're making decisions around money, like how the money should be allocated. And so you want transparency around that voting, you know, that takes place. Okay, we need to put so much budget around this cause or this department or whatever. And so those votes are recorded on chain. I think that's the second most important thing around the use case of, having the blockchain. But besides that, I think a lot of it is still using a lot of internet native tools like Zoom or Google Meet or Notion. They're great decentralized task management tools that are designed for DAOs. And I would highly encourage people, like if they're getting, if they're building these organizations, that they use those tools over Asana or over Trello. Those are great too, but because these tools are specifically designed to manage your contributors, which are mostly in and out, like, they're not employees, they're in and out, and they are mostly bounty based, like you pay them per task. So the way work gets done is very different. Like they should definitely read the book to understand how work gets done, but it gets done very differently. So these task management tools enable those kind of new ways of functioning. Also, there are built-in incentives, like you can issue an NFT. NFT is like a non-fungible token of proof of work, like they can start building an on-chain reputation. So when somebody completes a task, you can immediately issue an NFT, and that helps build their proof of work history on the blockchain that will help those contributors unlock more economic opportunities within this new way of operating, internet native way of operating.
Yeah. We are reinventing so many of the precepts of the corporate, traditional forms as we move into a digital age and as we have new tools and what we often kind of put under the banner of Web3 or crypto. We have just new ways of coordinating and engaging in creating organizations or teams. And so, the rule books are being rewritten and rechronicled and before our eyes. And there's going to be lots of failed experiments. And some will emerge that will teach us, kind of different ways that we can organize that may not look like a traditional corporation or government structure. That may be more efficient, especially for different types of tasks. What needs to exist in a decentralized finance smart contract and what degrees of autonomous nature that takes on and so forth, is going to be different than 15 people doing a beach cleanup and putting together a spontaneous DAO to, share budgeting
and having
and
a
resources.
multi-sig and then having the transparency around how they bought the gloves and why did they buy so many gloves?
Right, exactly. And then in governance and voting, and it's we do delegating voting experiments versus one person, one vote experiments versus token.
The other thing, I like to clarify about DAOs is there's a common misunderstanding. Like when you say DAOs, you immediately think voting. I know the day Elon Musk said, I think he was going to vote on something, and somebody, I think it was Asana founder who said, oh, it's a DAO, because he talked about voting. So it's the quick thing that comes to people's mind is DAO equals voting. And I want to change that perception too, because voting, I think DAOs equal decision-making, collective decision-making. And decision-making and voting are two different things, because you can still do collective decision-making without voting. You don't have to pass a vote every time, what should be the color of the logo. And that was happening in DAOs, initial DAOs. Klima DAO had those problems. Proof of Humanity had those problems. They had 20,000 token holders deciding what should be the color of the logo, right? And now they've taken a U-turn, they've come the middle way now. They've reorganized themselves because they went full decentralized and they realized it's not very effective in terms of getting work done. So I think we need to find a balance between decentralization and effectiveness, because we are not a social club. There are DAOs that are social clubs, Friends with Benefits, and what they're doing is very different. Where should we party today? Or it's simple yes and no, and maybe they have a few other things, but it's a social club, right? They're not there to get work done. But if we're saying organizations or nonprofits or social impact organizations of tomorrow are going to be on the internet, we need to really find a sweet spot between decentralization and effectiveness. So I think as Impact DAO Media, we're also tracking that. We're tracking how Klima DAO was in year one and how they in year two, and what's working for them, what's not working for them. So when newer ones come, they have this knowledge readily available. They don't have to repeat the mistake of going fully decentralized.
Right.
Decentralization is a journey,
Right.
and
Right.
you take it slowly,
Yeah.
one step at a time. And what works for you, and it should not compromise efficiency and effectiveness.
Great. So, what do you think that the Web3 space can improve on now? I mean, you've been in the space now for a couple of years, watching it closely. Like, where do you see the biggest areas for improvement?
I think I think a lot of people in Web3 are doing a lot of stuff, but very few are doing stuff for social impact. I think if we can grow the pie, like get more people excited about using NFTs for impact, for instance, I feel like they can unlock the revenue generation model for impact DAOs, because if impact DAOs are the future of doing good and all that, and then Web3 provides us with other tools for fundraising. And so a lot of NFTs and all are being done, but they're very senseless in the sense, we can talk about BAYC, like just trading monkeys and
Bored
stuff
Ape
like
Yacht
yeah,
Club.
yeah. So I think building more for social impact, like I had Mercy Corp, which is a big worldwide nonprofit organization. They have Mercy Corp Ventures, and they launched a Crypto for Good fund. And I had the person who leads the Crypto for Good fund on my podcast. And he talked about the same things. I think like if people can start using Web3 for doing meaningful work and addressing the real pain points, like I think the big promise of crypto was like financial inclusion. That's what got Brian Armstrong also excited. Like if you see his documentary, which I recently saw, but I also was in the Bay Area when he founded Coinbase and kind of knew his story from the very beginning. Like he was part of Airbnb and why he started Coinbase, because, you had to deal with multiple currency transactions, because, and so Bitcoin was like one common currency at that point of time. I know we have multiple currencies now, and also economic freedom for all. Like if you read his blog post, like he's so passionate about economic freedom that it can provide. So crypto has so much potential, but we're not in Web3. I think if more people can use it for the real purpose, I think it'll be great.
Nice. So what are you seeing in the fundraising space?
So Impact DAO space is very new, right? Like it started only in 2022, 2023, we're really seeing an explosion. And as more people learn, like as more everyday people learn about, or more change makers learn about how Web3 is not all scammy and that it has great potential to do good, and that this is the future of doing good. I think we need to really think of how we can then sustain these operations, and not make it grant reliant. So right now, a lot of impact DAOs are based. They're basically funded through grants, and Web3, the most popular crowdfunding platform in Web3 is Gitcoin, because they don't ask you for any legal status, right? Like you have a project, you get started, right? It's a great platform to bootstrap. Like you can, get your initial funds as grant, but we can't rely on Gitcoin every time, right? Like we can't rely on grants every time. And I think we need to, and if we start relying on grants every time, then we are repeating the nonprofit problem in Web3, right? And with grants, you can only grow as much as money you get in grants. And I've seen because of my previous experience, that sometimes projects, they are not able to grow because they didn't get funding that year, or they completely stop because they didn't get funding. Like it's so limiting. I think the reason why the nonprofit sector has suffered is because it is so grant reliant. So I think if we can become independent, that'll be the biggest thing for impact DAOs. And I'm forcing ourselves. I know we have Gitcoin, and I know they're experimenting with other ways like hypercerts and all. But again, it's like a very, I feel like if we can figure out our own revenue model, that's the best thing, and NFTs provide us with that option. And just 2 days ago, I talked about starting a Regions Good marketplace, like where we trade in cryptocurrency, somebody like as part of impact DAOs are making, like some of them are making such great stuff. Like we have impact DAOs in Italy, in Turkey, and they have so much to offer. And it doesn't have to be grant based. They can offer that value for an exchange in some kind of a token, cryptocurrency, and their goods can be represented through NFTs, digital representation through NFTs, and the NFTs can also serve as receipts, that yes, that service has been bought. So I think if we move to a trade model, it'll be better. Like trade is better than aid.
Trade is better than aid. Yes, indeed. I mean, so many nonprofits face this challenge of how to create sustainable revenue and not only rely on fundraising. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see NFTs and other forms of crypto native payment structures and models. Like, what does that create as new opportunity sets to maybe create more sustainability? Yeah.
I'm forcing the entire space to think in that direction now.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'm excited to be on the journey with you in chronicling what we're both, seeing in our respective lines of inquiry. We're taking a bit more of an ecological lens and looking at how Web3 could be used to coordinate for positive climate action and to make an impact in that space. But it'll be fun to just continue to watch your podcast and all of the media that you produce, the finding you on Substack, and where else can people pay most attention?
Everything
Twitter
is on impactDAOs.xyz.
Yeah, okay,
impactDAOs.xyz. I've even plugged in my own Substack right now over there because it's just easy to manage.
Nice.
Like just fewer places. There's a blog where I continuously write about the evolution of impactDAOs. There's a book. We are now in our second phase of research. So we first researched 12 organizations. Now we're researching 16 new organizations from exciting categories like network state, because I feel like network state is we are imagining a borderless world, totally reinventing the way people are going to travel and passports and just totally borderless, but aligned around a shared purpose. And network states begin as highly aligned DAOs, highly aligned digital communities. So we're studying 3 network states like Cabin DAO, Kift DAO, City DAO. We've got decentralized science DAOs that weren't part of our previous study. And I just announced yesterday that the next exciting category in the impact DAO space will be around wellness, spirituality, and because I think a lot of people are living lonely lives, and Web3 provides the medium to these communities, provide a way for people to connect around shared beliefs and purposes and values, and to do meaningful things together.
Nice. Well, if people are listening to this and feeling a bit overwhelmed by how many different tangents and rabbit holes and terminology, you are not alone, but we are all here to help make sense of the space and to discover it together. Deepa, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your time today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right, that was a fun one. It's amazing how Deepa is at the forefront of so many of these stories as they unfold. And I like what she said at the end there about trade is better than aid. You can find out more about Deepa's work and dive into Impact DAO Media at impactdaos.xyz. There's a link in the show notes. And you might also be interested in checking out some of the other conversations we had at the Refi Summit in Seattle. All of this and more available anytime at maearth.com. I'll see you on the next one.